Hello there, welcome to episode 71 of Right Where You're Sitting Now. Back from the dead, indeed, back from the dead. We had an interesting few weeks. Technical issues, we had a guest blow us out, which is fine, it happens. And we also had COVID in one of our households. So neither of us were infected, thankfully, but significant others were, let's put it that way, and the rain stopped play, as it were. But we are back on our regularly scheduled programming now, and joining me in the hot seat, in the co-pilot's chair, if you will, is one Mr. Mark with a C, Satyr.
Okay.
Hello. Oh yeah, and I like the fact that each time
salutations.
There you go.
I've reduced it to one word now.
I know, exactly.
Salutations.
It would just be a grunt within a few episodes.
No, and beyond that, it would be just like a nod, which won't even register.
Yeah, exactly.
That won't even register. That would be like a kind of, it'd be so etherealized by that point. It would be just like a concept.
Exactly, and I'll have to sort of interpret for the listener what's going on in front of me. It'll be like yeah, exactly.
Well, it'll be. There is like a veil between me and Ken, and I as you can, like Pythagoras, you see, I stand behind the veil, and my disciples interpret my movements, shall we say?
Yeah, it's
and utterances.
Every episode, just sort of beforehand, so I can sort of summon Mark. I have to get a seer stone out and sort of scry and see if
it's not that too far from the truth.
But anyway, what are we talking about this episode, Mr. Satyr?
All the world's a stage, Ken, and the men and women on it merely players, and we explore drama, cinema, music, the arts, as they are filtered through the sort of occult aspects of life, and we're going to focus today. We're going to on the book Occulture, two words in one. The unseen forces that drive culture forward, and it's by our esteemed guest, Mr. Abrahamsson, Carl Abrahamson. And his wit and wisdom,
friend of the show, returning guest.
His wit and wisdom that we are privileged, and I do regard myself as a very privileged person in the position it's sitting now. I do get to go to the fountainhead and learn, and hopefully, if on the way, fellow travellers there in the misty starry ether, the interwebs, they join us in that journey, then our work is done. These are just a suggestive signposts on the way. They're not definitive, they're not the final word, they're just invitations to reflect. Yeah,
exactly. We're all fellow travellers when it comes down to it. So yes, joining us again this week, Mr. Carl Abrahamson, one of my favourite guests. Really looking forward to talking to him about his book Occulture, the unseen forces that drive culture forward. It's not a new book. It came out a few years ago now, but it seemed one that was relevant, and it gave us an excuse to re-invite Mr. Abrahamson back onto the show. And I'm foreseeing that he will be a fairly regular guest in future episodes as well, which is good.
And and it anthologizes talks, lectures is given on other occasions, so they're not lost to to those people who weren't there. They can be enjoyed again and benefited from again, and you can benefit from reading the book. And if it inspires you, if you're if you listen to this, or it goes both ways, doesn't it? You might listen to this and think, oh yeah, that something sparked an interest there, or vice versa. Either way, it's it's very much a case of and rather than or. In all these cases.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I'm looking forward to this. Let's roll over and roll over. Let's jump over to our interview with Carl Abrahamson. Hello, Carl Abrahamson. Thank you so much for coming back on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure, and the more the merrier.
Excellent, brilliant. Certainly one of our favourite guests we've had on.
Yeah, absolutely, and I can really second that. This is a bit like the sequel. It's like Carl Abrahamson, the Revenge.
Yeah,
this time it's personal.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about your book Occulture today, which was released a while ago, but it's it's still a really interesting book. It's just for our listeners, it's Occulture: The Unseen Forces That Drive Culture Forward. So, what kind of made you want to put together a book like this?
Well, I think it was an increase in interest in what I was doing, and what I was doing. Let's say in the early 2010s was an increasing amount of lectures, meaning writing pieces that I could present as lectures, and we had Edda Publishing going, the company together with Fredrik Söderberg, and that was about the time when we visited the Pleasure Dome conference that the Scarlets put on in Brighton in 2012, I think that was, and all of these things, the Scarlets had approached me about anthologizing essays of this nature, and that became the book Resonances that came out in 2014. And by then I already had a great sort of momentum, because I love doing this kind of stuff, writing essays and doing lectures, and so I wouldn't say that I was on automatic, but I did work quite hard with it and found it very rewarding. And then of course what happens is that the material accumulates, and then suddenly you find yourself with, say, 20 or 23 essays, this was also the very instigating moment for Occulture specifically was when I was at a conference in New York in early 2016. So Resonances had been out for a while and had created kind of a buzz, which was very pleasant. And at this conference, which was called the Occult Humanities, it was at New York University, and there were many people there, listening and talking, and there were also some vendors and Inner Traditions were there, and I'd known their one of their editors for some time, and we talked about it, and he suggested that we should talk more about anthologizing whatever is available at that time, and that's basically what we did. And also at that time someone said something that really stuck with me, that I'm becoming like the Umberto Eco of the underground, and I love that, because I love Umberto Eco, and it's something with this kind of approach, which is not necessarily humoristic, but it's a kind of a pop attitude to dealing with heavy subjects like occult and esoteric topics that have previously been in a field that is not quite academic yet, but just highbrow and obfuscated, and often poorly written, and there's so many fascinating subjects and topics and people to write about. It's just amazing. So I felt like I needed to dive in even more. With Resonances, say I was up to my legs, but now I sort of threw myself head first into the waters that contain all of these things. And as an addendum to this sort of trajectory, I have just finished, and I'm sort of working on the copy editing and proofing of a new book of that nature called Source Magic, also on Inner Traditions, that's coming out early next year. And that's basically summing up the lectures and essays I've written in between Occulture and Source Magic.
Yeah. Also, as well, one of the things struck me about it is an excellent. It's a record of the lectures you've given, so other people, including myself, can get the benefit of them. So it's not sort of lost to the air. It's not lost to the ether. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think that's one of the beautiful things also with the internet. Has as many drawbacks as it has advantages, in the sense that you make so many things available, and inexpensively and in a fast, efficient way. But there's simply so much that you need to be motivated to really scratch the surface, find an entrance, find a page you like, bam, go into it. It's I feel often, although I know there's a lot of good stuff online, it's very rare that I sit down and actually do research in that sense. But when you have books, that's a different story, because then you have the reading experience in quite a different way. And I think for most of us, that reading experience is associated with two things. It's the pleasure of reading, usually perhaps fiction, and it's the association with learning. There's something in the very book form that can translate into ebooks, absolutely, but you very rarely sit down and read a book online. You're like scrolling 250 pages of great information. You need a book to do that. So I'm very happy about being productive and also seeing it all bloom into lovely little books.
Yeah, I've always preferred reading on a book to reading on a screen, and there seems to be a kind of intangible link between the occult and books, doesn't there?
Yes, absolutely, and that I think I mentioned that in Occulture also, if not, and also in like introductions to the Fenris Wolf and things like that, is that the resurgence, or at least the strong emergence of occult book publishing from, well, maybe 2000, but specifically I would say in the 2010s and onwards, has been a great reason for the general onslaught, we could say, of occulture as a phenomenon, because the Scarlets were there early on, and many other fine publishers making these incredibly beautiful editions that they make the books attractive in themselves as objects, in a way, as talismans, as they would probably call them. And I had a similar way of thinking with Edda Publishing in the 2010s, and it just goes to show that people are very interested in reading about these things, and that's the healthy thing. Not only these arcane, dusty volumes from, stemming from the Greek magical papyri or the medieval tomes or grimoires, and I think people want to read about these things in a new way, that's contextualizing things for the times that we live in. All of these things, there's a strong presence of like grimoire studies, both within academia, but also within the, let's call it the occult world, then, at least in our Western sphere. And I find that remarkable. It's also healthy, looking at historical things and sort of representing it for today, contextualizing it either through introductions or through more advanced studies of these old texts, whether it be about old Icelandic runes or actual Guishic things, and it's just like, what relevance do these things have for us today? I would argue that they do, because they speak to us in, I would call it like a mythic language. It's a symbolic language on one hand, but it's also a symbol filled with signal. There's transference of information that speaks to us on deeper levels than merely he said, she said, he did this, he did that, and it seems that the power is inherent in the material itself. Why else would it be emerging with such force? And I think that here we have culture in general, on one hand, and we could, state the obvious examples, as I've done many times, with the Harry Potters and the Lords of the Ring and many new things also, Midsummer and The Witch and all these things. That's part of the culture, where things pop up like little asphalt flowers in a kind of dead entertainment world. And then on the other hand, you have academia, which look at basically the same things, but in a different way. They are more empirical in the classical sense, in that they try to discern, to pick apart, to look at things in a microscope in a way. And that's fair and fine. And these two things together, they lead to a presence where it's mentioned everywhere, in magazines, on TV, online, of course. So from having been literally occult for a long time, for a large part of the 20th century and backward, it is now really out in the open. So you could argue that many of the occult things aren't really occult anymore. Okay, so then what is it? Well, you have the potential group on one hand. That's basically the self-help thing, transform your life, in a way you could say that Crowley's Thelema is like that. It's hands-on. It's the philosophy of will, as inherited from the German philosophers, with a lot of syncretistic magic from different parts of the world. And I think that's very, very good and very, very symptomatic of the occulture in a way, as opposed to the older occult culture. It's like saying the Golden Dawn was occult culture, but Crowley pushed things into an occulture, also by being flamboyant and present in a cultural setting himself. So it's just for me an endlessly fascinating things, and you can look at it like every day and see things. That movie is about that. The Northman could be one example, for instance. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's just these things pop up to a greater extent than I've ever experienced it, and I see that as a good thing, actually.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we enjoyed the Norseman. That was that's best film I think I've seen this year so far. And one of the phrases you use, or one of the ways you analyze this sort of kind of the narrative, is that there's a difference on one hand between mere escapism and a true myth. And the word true, and that sounds like a contradiction in terms, a true myth, but it's a myth in the sense of a mystical story, a story whose importance, its potential is like deeper than like just a historical account.
Absolutely. And I think when you really sort of keep pulling these threads from the great ball of yarn that is human philosophy, or whatever we want to call it, and you just keep pulling and asking again, why is it that this is going on right now? Why are all these things so present in our culture that we can actually call it an occulture? Well, I would argue that it has to do with an urgency in having to do with our survival instinct, basically. And I mean that on an individual level, but also on a communal level and on a global level. And what I mean by that is that let's use the psychological model, for instance. As we have an unconscious. The unconscious knows a lot of things and houses a lot of information that our ego, so-called, sometimes will not let pass through, because it will lead to upheaval of our comfort zone, basically, and our own petty, searches for increased personal power, things like that. However, the unconscious usually wins out by creating signals that become so strong that you can't really deny it. And if you keep on denying and repressing, it will actually lead to some form of illness. And I think that we have, since day one, or whatever you want to call it, been immersed not only in magical thinking, but also in magical behavior, a ritualized behavior stemming from and going to our intuitive center in a way that has to do with how do I cope with a chaotic outside, with a chaotic world. Well, we can work together in our little tribe and fence off enemies or dangerous animals, and we can also learn to react faster, increase the sensitivity of our senses. All of these things, they have traditionally been under an umbrella that today would be called, magical thinking, magical behavior. But as with many things from those early days, it has been passed on through genetics, and it's not just like a couple of weird psychological traits. It's deeply ingrained within us to acknowledge the importance of speculation, to go this thing and you go, what if I did this? What if I did that? Speculative thinking, daydreaming, allowing for visions to rule decision making to the point where you have a designated person or an office, that of the shaman, who went on trips, or you could go on communal trips and come back with information, meaning a very gnostic approach. Like there's nothing in between yourself and the information on deep levels that you need to be able to survive. And we've done pretty well with this. I mean, we've survived to this day. It seems pretty bleak right now, but let's keep our fingers crossed. And the thing is that in our cultural sphere, meaning the Western rational empirical, a lot of people have looked upon these things as, airy-fairy, new agey, wishy-washy, anything sort of derogatory with an ironical smirk. But that seems to be changing, and it changes through culture. And I would argue again that that's because we have an inherent need in readdressing the importance of these things being the intuitive validation of our actions and in decision making, the need to address ecological issues, the need for working together on small local levels to basically survive. And the more the outside chaos becomes, it seems to be closing in, meaning affecting us all, like we were talking about unusually warm weather in the UK and Sweden where we are. And these things make us very, very concerned and worried. That's not, something to merely write about in blog posts. It creates a deep anxiety. And how we deal with these things is looking for new ways. And if we cannot make rational decisions saying, I am now going to move to the countryside, I'm going to grow my own veggies, whether it makes a difference or not, we'll see, but it will make me feel better and be healthier. So if you can do that, fine. But if you can't and you're still undecided, those unconscious impulses will make themselves more and more heard until you take notice of them. And all of these things that we are seeing in the popular culture, like movies of that nature, they are there for that reason, because they fill a kind of demand. And then that could be a light demand, meaning entertainment, but it could also pack a mythical punch. And those are the things that are very, very interesting, because they will leave traces in people who have taken part of that specific expression, and it will hopefully affect them to make decisions of a more constructive nature.
Yeah, I mean, the environmental concerns as well, they have like a broader horizon. They point to a broader horizon about how do we relate to nature in the grander sense of the word,
yes.
How our relationship with them and so on. And it's very much been in the last 150 years a sort of tortoise and hare competition, where the sort of the tortoise of the unconscious is competing against the hare of technology.
There's a great metaphor or parable or image that I've started to use too, is that maybe the problem is that when we become too technologically inclined and you have these optical tools to, in quotes, help us see, meaning the microscope on one hand and the telescope on the other hand, to look out and see things closer in the great big vast cosmic space, and also like dissect things and look at them in a microscope, even on a cellular level and possibly beyond. However, what can help us to make healthier decisions in general is just to see. And I mean, the English language is great in that sense, because to see is in part that the ocular thing you see with your eyes, but it's also to see in the sense of understanding. Oh, I see. And I think that's enough. And I'm not sort of, as they say, dissing science or anything like that. On the contrary, but I think that it's not our myths that need to become more, scientific. It's the science that needs to become more mythic, in the sense it needs to connect with the true needs that we have. And that's a huge problem. That's the huge oil tanker at sea that you cannot turn around 180 degrees. It's simply too unwieldy, too slow a process, and that's exactly what that constitutes the problems we have today. It's we are on one hand individually glued to our comfort zones and not likely or willing to give those things up for a possible benefit that we don't know whether it's true or not. Or you could be radical and say, at least I'm going to try. Even if it's only on an egotistical level and it will make me feel good, I'm going to try to change the course of my life. And it's those decisions that I think that's where esoteric teachings and all of things, philosophical strains within the occulture can have a very benevolent, beneficial effect on individual human beings.
Yeah, and also the word see, I mean, the concept of seeing in the occult comes have a sort of resonance there, because it means to be hidden. I suppose these things are hidden in the war. They're on the surface, they're bubbling away on the sort of frothy surface of culture. But I think they remain occult, and then probably must always be, because they mean you've got to dig deeper, you've got to work harder, and then you're often drawn in. I don't apologise for repeating myself as before, but back in the day you had the storyteller, the shaman, sitting in front of the fire, telling stories of gods and heroes and monsters, and then we go to the cinema and we watch Norsemen or we sit around the television, and it's and essentially it's a very similar, it's essentially the same kind of experience, and actually they're the same stories, they're essentially the same stories, aren't they, repeated over again, and but often we're drawn in by something, seduced by something which can't articulate, and then, but if you are drawn in and you do make those connections, you can see the underpinning of these themes, and how they resonate, and how that's always intriguing as it all comes together.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think, if we stick with the Northman for a while, I think that was quite a good story, and the film as such good too. But the story is good. It's almost like a kind of a Viking Parsifal in a way, because he's like the naive babe in the woods that someone, he gets literally fucked over, but he retains this pure-hearted notion of avenging his father specifically. And why was this? It's not merely because it's his father, some kind of patriarchal honor or whatever. It is because the fact that he allows him to become initiated into the mysteries, by allowing him to be part of those Gnostic, shamanic, psychedelic mysteries. That, according to my way of looking at it, is why he becomes so adamant in fulfilling his quest for revenge, in a way. Then he realizes after the fact that everything is a bit more complex, and not everybody is who they claim to be, etc., and he's not either. But the thing that remains is that the key thing that glued him together with this initiator, in a way, was the shamanic experience. That was actually, when he became an adult, in a way, like an initiation rite in many ways. And I think that people have been missing out on those things a lot. It's not just missing out. There's a deep-rooted need in us to experience these things, and of course, different strokes for different folks. Some people are interested in Nordic things, or some people are interested in the African diaspora. Other people are interested in Western ceremonial magic, etc., ad infinitum. And I think that's exactly when you should use your intuition. as a young person, to orient yourself, not necessarily intellectually, what's most fascinating or trendy with all of these new occult publishers, but to go for the stuff that gives you with a sense of wow, a sense of wonder, a sense of an important word in this sense, enchantment. You're something that you're enchanted by, because that means that there is something inside you calling to be let out, and something on the outside knocking on your door. Those things are invaluable, and that's exactly the kind of thing that the negative, dark side of our culture is trying to suppress. Not so much perhaps in our specific countries, because because of a fairly advanced stage of civilization, despite everything. But as soon as you go into more draconian monotheistic environments, you do have this situation where to pursue these paths is actually still kind of dangerous. If nothing else, you will be ostracized or bullied, perhaps. You won't be burned at the stake, but you will be looked upon as a freak rather than as someone who's trying to survive, basically. So it's I don't know. I just find it very, very interesting that all of these things are parallel. They're going on right now. Is there a reason for that? Why all of this occult stuff is becoming occulturized and taking into the visible and making it non-occult in a way? And I do. And that my theory is what I just said, is that it's part of our emergency survival instinct as not only as one culture or one race, is the entire species. The human being is in pretty dire straits. So the question is, how do we deal with it?
Do you feel that, I mean, if you look, you're correct, if you look back in history, it was far more common for people to have a kind of initiatory experience, whereas nowadays it feels almost, it's like it's become a rarer thing. I mean, you could even argue that, Christianity has its initiatory experiences, but yet people are moving away from Christianity and becoming more involved with the internet and stuff like that. Do you think we'll go back to a state where we have more of an initiatory culture?
Well, I certainly hope so. And again, it's kind of irrelevant in what tradition it is, or even in what religion it is. But I do believe it has an important psychological function. I mean, we know that from just basic anthropology with initiatory rites at puberty, for instance, where it used to be actual rituals, whether they were kind of empty and social, it doesn't matter. But today it seems to be in our sphere that the real initiation for someone pubescent or a young person becoming slightly more adult is when they get the first smartphone, right? It's just like there's something missing in terms of an action or an investment or a sense of trust in this young person to say that you are now on a different level than you were yesterday. And what usually has to do with sexual awakenings and bodily changes, and hopefully mental ones also. But in our culture here in Scandinavia, for instance, there's nothing of that. And I think that creates a huge vacuum that is filled with light and possibly detrimental entertainment, in which they can see other cultures that do things of that nature, and that will be attractive for them. Ergo, you have, for instance, American media imperialism, which presents solutions that are coming from them, but it's presented as being, the gospel in a way, and young people who are rootless in a way become very susceptible to accepting those entertainment visions as actual fact and as models for behavior and lifestyles, which of course is tied in with consumerism and many bad things, actually.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for the way myths have been kind of capitalized upon as well. It feels like I know when Jodorowsky talks about people like Spielberg, for example, if we're looking at it from a film perspective, he calls it spiritual excrement. He says that this that Hollywood has kind of removed love and removed all passion, and you could argue that it's removed the kind of the want for initiation, couldn't you, or the want for this kind of passion. It's presented a new corporate version of the world, which doesn't have the space for the occult or the the initiatic path.
No, absolutely. It's very true. But then again, it's been going on if you look at Hollywood specifically, that's been going on for over 100 years now, and that's cool. I mean, they also produce a lot of great films, and young filmmakers that come up, and even some biggies are great because they are what they are. They're not really for us who have a slightly more critical approach. Perhaps we can see things for what they are and say, well, this evening I'll just watch something dumb. We can. It'll be relaxing, like watching a game of sports, a soccer game, whatever. It really means nothing, but in the moment it fills you with a light kind of excitement. And you can engage in, the bad guy or the good guy. Maybe that's some kind of inherent need that we have also. But I do think that or the most depressing thing has in a way been the commercialization of these topics. But then again, that's the way it's always functioned. That kind of commercial culture will always be susceptible and actively on the lookout for what's going on in the zeitgeist. And if there is an occulture that's emerging, then that's the kind of entertainment we'll see. And in a way, I do think that the insane amount, the outpouring of, stories coming from the comic book world, like with the Marvel films and the DC films, it's basically comics that they did pack some very light, but still a mythical punch. Writing about these gods, trials and tribulations. It was basically the Greek gods or the Nordic gods repackaged into comic book form, and kids love that. I remember I used to like that too. And there was also this thing which I don't know if you had that in the UK. There was a series of comic books called Illustrated Classics, which was basically all the great heavy books of world literature in comic book form. And I used to devour those before I had the motivation to read heavier books, because it's a form. It's a medium in which you can present the same stories over and over and over again, and that's essentially how myth has been rolling along throughout the millennia. Also, it's just taken from being strictly oral tradition, to being written down, to being presented as dramatic plays, carried on in music through troubadours and many other, examples. And just onwards. And now I guess the latest medium would possibly be computer games, I guess, that have the same kind of attraction, interaction. But the question is, what is actually presented? Is it still the same didactic or motivational or teaching that's ingrained in there as the original myths, or is it simply so diluted that it carries nothing? On a bad day, I would say that's probably so, but on a happy, optimistic day, I would say, well, maybe that's just the medium that exists today, and it still sort of carries something that kids will realize the narrative structure of the hero's quest or whatever, in the sense that they can relate what they have learned through playing 100 video games of a similar nature. They can see that it's the same structure as when they hear about Homeric epics, and that's because it's basically the same story always, same structure always.
Yeah, I think that series of comic books, publications of the sort of classics, and I think they were called Golden Key. Is that right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
I think they were. Yeah, they were. Yeah, and yeah, they made it accessible, didn't they? I mean, I think also as well. I mean, thinking. In the sort of 80s and so on, you had things like Clash of the Titans and the Ray Harryhausen.
Yes.
And without me realizing it, I mean, I was being exposed to sort of classical mythology, and which only
absolutely,
which that sort of gave me the sort of I sort of pursued that. I sort of something inside me thought, oh, this is an interesting narrative, without being able to articulate it consciously, and then going to the sources and so on. And so maybe more and slightly more optimistically, I mean, like with the Norsemen, I mean, they're using modern day technology, the utmost modern day technology, and making it very accessible to people. And some people watching that film, they will think, oh, that business with the tree, what was all that thing, and so on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think also it's interesting how we are very much formatted as young people by the culture we consume, and that's why it's important to make sure that there's good stuff around. And I'm thinking, if we think back at what kind of movies and books and TV did we consume? Well, I was certainly drawn to the darker, cooler stuff without really understanding why. And my parents let me watch, anything I wanted, or supported reading, because reading in itself was something important. And that, of course, formatted me. I have, dear memories of, there was one summer specifically when Swedish television, which that time only had 2 channels, and on like Tuesday evenings at 9:35, I still remember the time, they used to show these old American monster films, and it was so formative for me in terms of aesthetics, in terms of being scared by a certain kind of dramatic tricks. It has stayed with me forever. And of course, that's how we build our identities too. It's what we take in and filter that become parts of us. So that's why it's important to, again, trust your intuition and only accept things where you feel that kind of resonance, because that resonance is part of the mythic, let's call it the mythic feedback. You take something in and it might be a complete dud or blank or stripped and completely pointless. You don't even chew that, you just spit it out in a way. On the other hand, there will be things that are inexplicably attractive, and there's a reason for that, because it speaks to I guess to your soul, or to deeper layers of yourself, and those are the things you need to go for.
Yeah, I mean the Universal Studios in the 30s. I mean, lots of people from sort of Jewish communities in Europe sort of went to America and joined the studios, and what they drew off was the folklore of Europe. The werewolf, the vampire, and also classics of literature like, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and so on.
Absolutely, and they did it also in an aestheticized way, and that's the importance. I think, each not generation, but each cultural period has its own aesthetics, and they certainly brought some very cool, German expressionism to Hollywood, which helped very much to create the aesthetics of film noir, for instance, which then led on to other things. And it's just, you can see these sort of aesthetic strains, just as you can backtrack in the let's call it the magical anthropological or the occultural cultural repository. We can read books about Crowley, for instance, and see, lineages, initiations, heritage, or in the Golden Dawn that, these people were associated, this was a writer or this was a painter, and they had both artistic lineages and they had magical lineages, and it becomes like a big what do you call it, like a hereditary tree in a way, or what do you call that? Well, you make a graphic symbol of an overview or a display of someone's family tree. You can see like a family tree in many of these strains that also merge, and you see a connection there. Well, Austin Spare was for a little bit connected to Crowley, that's interesting, and Austin Spare and Crowley was connected to Kenneth Grant, that's interesting. So when you have that kind of family tree overview, you realize that very, very important things in our culture are affected or initiated by quite few people. And it's not people who do that through demagogic ways, so the ones who scream the loudest. It's the ones that have the most impact, the strongest impact on a cultural level. So I mean, the master stroke, the genius of Crowley was not his syncretism, but it was his formulating his syncretism and making books that then lived on. Same thing for Spare, who was such an avid self-publisher in a way. And, to know whether consciously or just intuitively that I need to formulate this because things might not be happening for me while I'm alive, but it will be worthwhile and valuable for those who come after me. And that's the true generosity of, I would say, like real magicians. And people could argue, well, they were just narcissistic to the max. They were just trying to live on after life. But that's something we all think about, and some people will break through that. They will become, if not immortal, then at least their lifespan will be longer because of the fact that they have left some relevant culture behind. And that's a rare thing. For instance, take someone like Karl Marx. It's not his theories or ideas that are interesting or that live on. They have actually failed quite miserably. But him as a cultural phenomenon, being like a celebrity in a way from that kind of mid-19th century tumultuous Germany, that's an interesting person. And that's the reason why he's still around in our zeitgeist. People and spirits can live on if they have enough what do you call it? Not materiality, but agency beyond death, in a way.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the book, you kind of compare, well, you start to compare Crowley and Rudolf Steiner.
Yes.
And they're two names that just endlessly pop up. It's very difficult to start investigating the occult rather in any way and not see those two names appear, and Blavatsky would be another one, obviously. But why do you think it is that you were saying earlier that certain characters seem to sort of play massive roles? Why do you think that is?
Well, one thing is their own persona that, psychologically you could call them obsessionals, you could call them narcissistic, you could call them many things that almost sound derogatory. And I don't mean to sound derogatory because I see them as good, important people, but their own drives has to do with their own pursuit of power, and maybe there's a strategy there, leaving something behind, But again, it just goes to show that they, like Crowley and Steiner, for instance, they were very sensitive. They had their antennae out, and Crowley, who was a little bit of a megalomaniac in his toolbox, created his own, not just a philosophical or magical system, but he also branched out in why let's also include some religion in there. Of course, he would be the prophet. That's where it fails for me. But in terms of a philosophy, keeping up the heritage from Nietzsche and Schopenhauer in terms of the philosophy of will, and then adding very healthy syncretistic approach to magics coming from different parts of the world. There, I think Crowley was brilliant. But again, what he did was to formulate these things and actually making sure that they were all published. And now it's like an industry with endless regurgitations within academia. Crowley is much more present now than he's ever been, so he would be happy. And Steiner, of course, was a little bit, I wouldn't say smarter, but he had a broader palette in a way. So he made sure that anthroposophy, which is a legacy coming from theosophy, that it included other things than merely his writing about esoteric concepts. You have the Waldorf school system, you have organic farming, you have Veleda, this company that makes sort of clean products, and anthroposophy as such, which is like a school of spiritual thought, I think you could say. So he left behind a lot of things and movements that are all very related to the main Gnostic thing, which of course Crowley is also, meaning the individual needs to wake up to realize an inner or possibly cosmic truth about how we're all interconnected. It's a holistic thing, and when you wake up to that, you can choose which kind of approach you can say no, but you can also say yes and embrace it and be part of this holistic thing, and that goes for all cultures. Other cultures, like in Asia, for instance, they're usually not person-oriented. They're not instigator or creator-oriented. Sure, you have the Buddha, but the Buddha is a state of mind. And a few other people also, like, there's a mythical figure called Bodhidharma, who developed Zen Buddhism. Whether he existed or not, or whether Lao Tse existed, or we can't be sure. But the books that are out still being distributed in their names have a deep impact on culture even today. So that's kind of remarkable, and it goes, of course, for the anthology that we call the Bible too. Different people put that together over a period of a long time, but still it's widely available, and it's sort of like the cornerstone for good and bad of a culture that has been predominant for a long time. So it's not through political things, it's not even through wars or these causal human basic things. It's only culture that really remains, and you could argue that even history writing is not so much an objective thing. It's part of culture, which can be very subjective. But the important thing is that we can't interpret and assess that if there is no form that we can take in, meaning usually books, written stuff, art stuff, paintings, scratchings, drawings, anything that preserves a thought or a spirit in the material.
It's interesting. I mean, one of the things that kind of bound Steiner and Crowley was the fact that they sort of became influential within an existing group and then created a new group. And I wonder if have we left room for people to do that again now? This is the thing I often think about, is who is the next Crowley? Who's going to be the next big kind of influential, but on a sort of Crowley Steiner level, have we left ground for people like that to sow their seeds?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that it's a little bit a dilemma also about the esoteric nature about in these groups, for instance, Theosophy versus Anthroposophy, Golden Dawn versus Crowley's orders. Things were still pretty occult at the time, and that perhaps made it easier for someone to see that, wow, there's great potential in this kind of group thing, the group dynamic. I'm triggered by it. I love it. I want to have my own group. That's basically like, kids in the sandbox. I'll build my own sandbox over here. Maybe that's part of the human dynamic. They did it, and they did a great job. And can we see something similar today? I'm not sure I can, because there are no real influential esoteric environments of the same nature. We have the ones stemming from those days, but that's just a legacy that's carried on in a good way or bad way. But there's really, I think maybe one problem or challenge here is that is there at all any occultism left? I know that there is, there are still secret groups and stuff like that. But then again, then they won't have this crossover potential of becoming occulture. These groups that I'm talking about, they are very happy to be occult and not have any online presence or anything, because they want to do work in a tradition that's, it doesn't need to, proselytize. It doesn't need new members, for instance. It doesn't need to attract people. It's a bit timeless in that sense. Whereas Crowley and Steiner, they were these environments were around. They attracted a lot of people, but it was still kind of esoteric. And I don't think that's the reason, though, why these two people, as human individuals, wanted to break free. I think that's more of a psychological disposition that certain people have. They're not content in playing second fiddle. They want to run their own show. And it can go, it's the same dynamic that we can find in rock and roll bands or other groups or fraternities, where someone breaks free and creates their own stuff. Like a company also, two founders create a company that becomes successful. Usually one founder breaks away and starts his own. It seems to be part of human nature. But I do think that the reason why it won't be so visible is not that dynamic is gone. It's just that there are no real occult groups or occultural sort of semi-visible occult groups that have that cultural presence. It's taken on by completely different kinds of networks. Like I'm thinking, like Anonymous perhaps, or WikiLeaks, or it's always something that's not necessarily spiritual. It's something more connected with politics or zeitgeistish rebellion against too much control, etc. I think. Although the spiritual is very, very, very important, I would argue perhaps the most important factor at this point in our civilization and existence. Unfortunately, I don't see that rooted in a mass way. In that sense, that's why occulture is interesting, because I would say that the occultural manifestations are like asphalt flowers coming up through the very repressive constructs that humans have built, usually stemming from a monotheistic environment, but it exists beyond that also.
Yeah, and I suppose this sort of, which relates to lots of occult impulses, the sort of teenage phase. I think, Mr. Abrahamsson, you mentioned in the book about wanting to always rebel against your parents
Yes.
in the spiritual or cultural sense of the word. I mean, you can only maintain that for so long, and sometimes I think you can go the other side of the coin. The other side, the disadvantage of it is that you're not pioneering, you're not breaking new ground, you're constantly trying to reinvent something.
Yes.
It's like in the early 90s I had some connection with sort of chaos magic and so on, and there in the early 90s the group I had some connection with, they decided that they were going to throw out the Tree of Life completely because it was hierarchical. We don't want a hierarchical thing like the Tree of Life, and
Yeah.
with all its roots literal and symbolic in Judeo-Christianity. We're going to have a vertical hierarchy, and they invented this new tree which was going to take over, was going to sweep away the everything else. Well, that's over 20 years ago now, nearly, and I still haven't found anything as adaptable and as protean as the cannibalistic Tree of Life. But I'm very happy to be proven wrong. But so it does go both ways, isn't it? And there's also there's a very vivid phrase in the Occulture book about we can believe anything we want now. Well, at least in the West we can. We can believe anything we want, but in a way we don't really believe anything. Maybe we can't believe anything. And the opposite extreme to that is the position where you're completely dogmatic and your mortal enemy is anybody else, politically or spiritually, who just happens to be on the other side of things. And that's also very toxic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really not a new concept, but I think one of the greatest culprits in our culture is the very rapid emergence of online culture and the technology that's sort of associated with that and sort of facilitates that. Because what's happened is that we are simply so fragmented, and we quickly became addicted to the technology itself for transmission of communication, transmission of information, transmission of emotional messages and things like that, instead of communicating on a more tangible or perhaps even spiritual or material level. Technology is also a proxy. It's not really the material. The gadgets are material, of course, but it's not the same as having a face-to-face conversation. FaceTime is not a conversation in the sense that you can really convey between the lines emotions and stuff. And of course, definitely not within the texting, where you have a simplification of language that's incredibly detrimental, I would say. And for us, it's no problem. We can sit here and be smug and adult and cultivated and talk about these lofty things.
Well, we like to think we are.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, but it is a problem for a younger generation who have the technology as their not second nature even, but like their first nature, and that's the basis of how they communicate. And not only that, but it's also what they communicate. It's a fictionalized way of looking at the world, where even places make sure that they are, quote, grammable, unquote. So reality changes so that the people who they want to come there can partake in the dissemination of photographs from that place, to make sure that they are parts of an basically illusory lifestyle, because it usually mimics a lifestyle that is much more advanced and affluent than what they have. So it's a weird situation where let's call it real information with transformation potential gets shoved to the side for the immediate gratification of showing well, you could say it's a symbolic image, or just leave it at image, where you show an image of yourself as if you were in a different position in life. That can be used for magical purposes, but that requires an awareness of it, this kind of almost fake it till you make it. But even that requires a kind of strategy that is based on honesty and self-knowledge, meaning I am not happy right now. I know that I'm not happy because I want to be in that position over there. But that's when the awoken or the magical person creates a strategy to move him or herself over to that position that's desired. But I think that the young people specifically today who grew up with technology that basically nurtures great and also satisfying illusion will find it hard to validate information that has what I call transformation potential, because it usually requires quite hard work. And today everything is gratified more or less immediately. All you have to do is press, like, or a heart, or another emoji, or just post another picture where you look the same as a billion other people, making the same poses and creating some kind of it's not a sign of life. It's a sign of effacing individuality under the aegis or banner of, quote, individuality. It's an illusion, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've been reading a lot of Baudrillard again recently, and he's he talks about simulation and kind of authenticity, and it feels like, in a way, maybe the occult, or kind of joining an occult order or practicing the magical act, presents one of these technologically minded youth with a kind of authentic experience, and maybe that could be part of the kind of appeal, the kind of uptick in the occult that we're seeing at the moment. It could just be that, in a way, it presents an authentic experience. An initiation's a deeply powerful thing, isn't it? It's it's an authentic experience when you do it the right way. I've often wondered if, one of the kind of keystones of why the occult or why kind of Thelema, or the Golden Dawn, or whatever, whichever version you want to ascribe to, I wonder if that's kind of its key appeal could be, that it promises authenticity.
Absolutely, and if it's good, it not only promises it, but it delivers it in terms of initiation rituals in which you are taking place and time with your physical body in something that you don't really know what's going to happen. People today know a lot of things. They know, they can predict, the law of probability for this. If I do that, this happens. This is kind of a causal awareness. But in an initiation, for it to be powerful, you need to be overwhelmed either by sensory impressions or by philosophy, pure and simple, or a combination. And I'm thinking that the problems usually in our culture, they usually arise after after the fact, after it has happened, because that's what signifies a good order or a fraternity or a magical group, in the sense that there is a language and a terminology and a tradition of taking care of the person after the initiation, and not just handing over a book saying, and a funny hat and a certificate saying you are now on this level, because it's not that simple. That then we're talking more like, I would say, like hollow things, like old school Freemasonry, which usually it doesn't really carry any magic as far as I know, but it really is more like a fraternity where you go through the motions. But another example of that, where people are attracted to an initiation, and they get sort of disappointed or scared even, that would be the psychedelics. In the 60s there was like mass consumption of LSD and other psychedelics, and today we have ayahuasca and other simple plant medicine that has, of course, deeply magical qualities and deeply mythical potential, in the sense that it can take you to a place where you look at yourself and you realize things. You can connect the dots without disturbance from the outside noise or from other people's demands, and it's just like you are elevated to a level of severe insight. And I mean severe in the sense that it's fantastic, but it can also be severe in the sense that if you don't get help in trying to put the pieces back again, then you might just retract and say that was a good trip. But that trip has the potential of you changing your life in order to become a better person, in the sense, not, from any kind of objective moral point of view, or simply a better person, more in line with whoever it is that you want to be. And that's why I find it very interesting, and I think that kind of experience, going on ayahuasca excursions to South America, or some workshop in a rural setting or something, it's those things are definitely part of the occulture, as is serious psychedelic journeying and exploration, because it leads to something that no one else can give you, and I believe that the key to all of these things being good, that is the Gnostic approach. There's no hindrances, no layers, no people between your experience as a human being and what you experience. You don't need to have someone in the moment explaining to you or telling you what to believe or how to perceive and how to experience. What you bring back from your exploration is something for you and you alone. And what I mean then by, that you need a terminology or a group possibly that's more like processing an out of place experience. That can be true for traumatic experiences also. Counsel groups after a horrible accident, for instance, or after war or whatever. It's just we as humans need to process things, especially things that we cannot fathom ourselves. And sometimes these soul-searching journeys can be that. And then, of course, it can be good to ventilate. But the what's going on the inside, the information, that's yours and yours alone. If you want to share it, that's fine. And I think that's really what the original magical journey is about. The magical path is you securing that information in ways that may be traditional, or they might be completely experimental. Occult history, esoteric history, can provide ample suggestions, sources of inspiration. There are plenty of groups around, plenty of teachers that you will have to see if you can trust them, but that may be part of the game also. So it's not like it's lacking in terms of great quantum self-development. On the contrary, we probably have more of that than ever before, but it's not going to be online. It's not going to be in a diluted form. It's not going to be in, basically, it's the human interaction that is the key to that. And whether it's in dialogue or whether it's in actual practice or ritual together or initiation rituals, people will set out on this path, set out on this journey, and they will find extraordinary things. But you have to set out. That's the thing. In real life.
I think it's experiential, isn't it? I mean, there has to be that sort of living experience of. I mean, one of the initiation with any the conflict of interest, I suppose, between the current age and its and ubiquitous nature of information through IT technology and so on the internet, and the experience that you can have, in an initiatory body, is that people get confused between information and understanding and the actual experience. And I've had conversations with people before who were preparing, shall we say, for initiations of one sort or another, and I remember saying to one individual in particular, well, you're not going to find the authentic experience of initiation inside the pages of the book. And their response to me, and I quote, was that I didn't read it in a book, I looked at it on the internet. I mean, that's an extraordinary statement, and where's the authenticity? Of I think often people don't, in initiation in the fullest sense of the word, people think, oh well, this is just some sort of like formality I have to go through to join some sort of social group. Actually, there might be an element of that, but initiation on a deeper level is something, one of the things make it more likely to work, if you're open to it, if you're ready for it, is the psychology of surprise. It's going to make that impact on you.
Absolutely, and I think that's why the reason we have a lot of groups of interest groups or fraternities, or whatever you want to call them, is that they provide an aesthetic or a language saying, hey, look at us. And if you feel that sort of positive resonance with whatever symbols they have, then you should go for that, because there's a reason, as I said before, for that attraction. It's something deeply rooted within you. But then, of course, you can be shallow, and it can be merely social, as you say. But if they provide some form of initiation, it needs to be something that, in a way, glues you together with a group. I mean, this is from the group's point of view. You don't want to initiate someone who says, okay, thank you, goodbye. You want them to hang on and take the next step and the next initiation, because most of these things are real human construct, and keeping people in structures, and preferably hierarchies too. And that can be good. It's like going to school in a way. If you accept the need that you need basic schooling, then you have to adapt to certain rules. You get there at 8 and you leave at 3 or whatever, and you go for a certain number of years. Some may argue far too many, but still, it's a kind of contract that you have, and that contract remains later on by boring things like paying taxes, and hopefully you will get something for your tax money. But it's also true in esoteric groups and magical orders, is that and that's what Crowley did with the Golden Dawn. In a way, he published those rituals in the first volume of the Equinox, and that, of course, was a big no and a sacrilege in a way for the people on the inside, because they revered this material. It was like sacred material, but for the outside world it really didn't matter at all. People didn't care. It didn't change anything. And then, of course, later on, Crowley's books were bootlegged too, in a way, and it's just, you have this, it's not a karmic thing, it's just how things work. There will always be someone who takes the secrets and flaunts them, and quite often in order to build his or her own environment as being the best or the most insightful, the one with the most secrets, the most attractive. It's just human nature. But again, if you know that, and feel that you want to have something that is, I don't want to go into a group like that in order to maybe experience something that I could maybe express as being, spiritually valid or relevant for me, or inspiring in a quantum kind of way. then you should probably pursue your own path of self-exploration and exploration also, like within cultures that you find attractive, within cultural groups that you find attractive. The magical bits and pieces are not necessarily available in magical, like in quotes, groups and settings. The most magical revelations for me have come basically in nature as such, the forest, being at sea, stuff like that, being in such connection with a life force that's beyond our kind of petty intellectual, cogitating, meandering mental thing. You need to be sort of break away from that and go into the greater life force. That has been very beneficial to me and revealing to me, much more so than having basically spent my entire life in different groups and societies. But that's good too, because it has taught me that perhaps it's not here. You learn by not becoming disappointed, but you learn by accumulating information that after a while you realize that the process has been me realizing that I don't really need this to realize, how magical the world is. For that, you need an open mind and a tolerant mind, and that you can achieve or find or acquire or develop or train in many different ways.
Yeah,
so that's the key, to when you're on the path, make sure it's your path and that you're not indoctrinated or influenced too much by people who want to sell you their stuff.
Yeah, all knowledge is paper, and but like as Cruddy himself points out, the mysteries are not something that can be communicated easily or at all, and the it's a mystery, and not in the sense that it's like a kind of a crossword puzzle. It's it's a mystery in the original sort of classical sense of the word.
Exactly, and I liked what you said there about information is paper, or however you put it. It's like there are other things that within culture that can really become tangentially occulture, and those are things that relate more to art, and I don't mean illustration. I mean art that goes. Where there's more than meets the eye, so to speak, and that's why a poem, for instance, can open you up to a magical sensibility much more than Magic in Theory and Practice by Crowley. In a way, that's a technical manual, but some pieces of poetry or even fiction, I for one love what's called magical realism. It's basically a straight literary narrative, but there are weird things going on, and that makes my mind go. It creates a jolt or a tilt or a little shock to the system that opens me up to become more partaking of a greater kind of fantasy when reading that particular text. And of course, we know goes for movies too. Do we want to watch the latest Avengers movie, or do we want to watch something new by Jodorowsky or David Lynch, for instance? It is a matter of taste, but we know that those filmmakers create an impact in our minds that we have not only become accustomed to and like, but every time there's something new, there's something unexpected. And in the unexpected, within cultural expressions, it will be challenging, because it will be like a little mini trip in a way, where you have to go, wow, that's amazing, or whoa, that's not cool. You have to make some kind of chewing and swallowing process, instead of, as I said before, not even chewing, but just quickly spit it out again, like the Marvel films or the superhero films. It's just too, it's just so beautiful. You can't analyze the music, but it takes you places. It gets you daydreaming immediately. You can find yourself crying when listening to some music, and you simply cannot explain why. Same is true for paintings and other expressions of artistic creativity. It goes beyond the rational. It is tangential to, it connects with the magical and the mythical, or at least it should do that. And that's exactly why occulture is a good word, because it connects occult with culture, and it really goes both ways. The occult philosophies have been as influenced by the contemporary times at the times as vice versa. It's not a one-way street.
I just wish there was more more David Lynch and less Avengers.
Yeah. But unfortunately, I have to make you disappointed there. That's why we have to cherish the artists who really go to that length of being not only honest to themselves, but also having the power and the force and the vision to toss it out there for us to partake of also. Because if nothing else, it will be an inspiration to know that there are other people out there who see the world not perhaps in the same way, but in a similar way enough to inspire us to keep looking.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the reason I became a filmmaker was because I had such a visceral shock watching Blue Velvet. My favorite director of all time is David Lynch. I'm absolutely obsessed with him. And
no, absolutely. And he was so great also in the sense that he still is great, but it's just that kind of era when he was really hot in a way. It took that surrealistic approach that he had before also, but harsher, like Eraserhead style, and present that in as kind of a language that was commercial, that was attractive, that was sort of mainstream in a way. Beautiful perversion and the beautiful transgression that can really affect culture. Eraserhead can only be a cultic expression, or an occultic even, because it speaks with an esoteric language to the few that have the guts or the time to sit and watch it. Whereas something like Blue Velvet was really like on the borderline between mainstream iconography and absolute, madness in a way. So and containing a lot of interesting, insightful psychological stuff also. That I would say that was Blue Velvet and Lynch at that time, even with Twin Peaks, which was like a lighter thing, but still that's part of an occulture for sure.
Oh, definitely. I mean, Blue Velvet is the kind of epitome of the kind of behind closed doors nature of the occult, isn't it? In many ways, it's this kind of hidden in plain sight, this kind of reality going on that it's framed within the kind of reality of picket fences and this kind of like idealized America, but behind if you sort of peel back the layer and look a little bit deeper, you see this kind of sort of I don't know, like mysterious and kind of slightly scary undercurrent. And it's
definitely, absolutely. And I think that he's very, whether he is into psychedelics or has never been, but is a natural, it is very much his films are very much like psychedelic trips in that sense, in that there is an overarching structure that you can cling to if you want to, but if you just let go, it will be a very insightful and colorful and sometimes deeply disturbing and terrifying experience also.
Yeah, just like the new Twin Peaks, that pretty much sums up the most recent one, which I thought was a masterpiece. But absolutely. So I think we should wrap up a bit, and I'd like to know what your feelings on, like, where do you think Occulture goes next? What's the future that if you were to project forward?
I can see continuation of thematic presence, meaning in movies and literature and the music, there will be a continued and possibly increasing presence of occult themes, and that doesn't only mean like pointing back to history of this witch was cool or whatever, meaning also philosophical strains within cultural expressions, and thereby it becomes occultural. So I think that's a good thing. And then I've also been thinking a lot about you can't say that one thing is a good thing and the other thing is a bad thing. But in terms of the occult, this kind of repository that contains seed, that contains germinating seed underground in the dark and the hidden, that needs to be I don't know, not protected, but it needs to be left alone in a way. And of course, it's an environment that is filled with survival instinct and intelligence, and it will. And I mean concretely by like groups that I mentioned that I know exist, but who prefer not to be visible. They prefer to do their work. They might publish within their group and stuff in order to help the members of that group. And that's something I find very, very hopeful also, meaning breaking away from the visibility of social media, for instance, not flaunting every little ritual, every little magical tool that you've constructed, because that's just like, a foodie. That's like presenting a food picture of what you ate today. So I think that a kind of occultism, a new kind of occultism that is becomes occult or remains occult willingly in order to protect itself. Because there is a very, very interesting thing going on, as you know also. It's the concept of, enchantment versus re-enchantment. Is the world now re-enchanted? And I think I wrote in Occulture specifically concerning academia. The academic studies is booming. There are now chairs in increasing places, and the conferences about Western esotericism and all these things. And on the whole, I see that as a good thing, but it's definitely not re-enchanting the world. I would say that academic studies of these things is actually de-enchanting it in a similar way that rational empirical rationality did at one point, and religious intolerance did at one point. But on the other hand, the positive aspects of academia looking into these things is far outweighs the negative aspects of it being nitpicked and picked apart and looked upon as something inherently freakish, because that's basically what they're doing, which is strange because many of the academics actually come from magical backgrounds, from esoteric groups and stuff. But I guess they found career opportunities instead, and then they have to adapt that in order to get tenure and positions and stuff like that. So I will see the value of the academic work as custodians of information. It's not their deductions or conclusions that are interesting, because they very rarely are, but they assemble information and preserve them in book form, and that again is what has been needed and will be needed also in the future, if and when people are trying to rebuild a civilization. If this one breaks down, then you need, just like we can look back and say, well, at least as far back as Greece and some fragments from Egypt and stuff, what were they up to? And we can still use those things today and find inspiration, if nothing else, in those things. And I would like for this culture to leave something behind for the future readers and practitioners and occultists of the future. And then I think that all the shards or the pieces of the puzzle, even the academic ones, will be of use and relevance in making the puzzle of the future. And I hope also my thinking and the writings about occulture and other things, I do that mainly because it amuses me. I love to talk to people like you and to people who find this interesting also. But I think they will have a value. The books will have a value in the sense that they have a different approach than the academics. And that approach will be much more conducive to experimentation, to personal practice, to appreciating agnostic attitude. At least that's what I hope.
Yeah, and I mean, well, I feel we're coming to drawing to a close, and I feel quite disappointed in a sense because we could have talked about so much else. I mean, we hardly we could have done with the anthology of essays and talks in the culture book. I mean, there were so many other things like the Topi thing we could have anyway.
Oh yeah, I mean, maybe we'll do a culture part 2 at some point. So
well, we could easily,
absolutely, let's do it soon, because soon Source Magic, the next book, will come out, and then that will have precedence.
I think also as well, on just reflecting very personally. I mean, I'm passionate about film as well. I'm a very visually oriented person, and one of the things I've always appreciated and always been, I like it when I'm surprised by it and amazed by it, is that I see different styles of film, genres of film, as like different coloured doors you can go in, and it always does impress me that you can have this immersive experience when it works well. Whatever it can be like a silly comedy or like a horror film made in the 70s, or even all sorts of different things, science fiction, and I always appreciate that, and I like to be surprised, and even, dare I say it, in defense of Marvel, I was surprised, but I like it when it's become very formulaic in lots of ways. But I appreciated like Loki, because I like it because it took you on a journey about the nature of free will and good and evil, and Moon Knight, that took me into interesting territory. So slightly, and also back to the Norseman. I mean, my understanding is actually that film is actually based on a traditional saga. So that's very interesting how we have this very ancient story. How much flesh had been put on the bone to present it to modern audiences, I'm not sure, but the central character Hamlet, apparently that's the root of the word, the name Hamlet, which
right makes that perfect sense.
So we're back where we started from. So there we are.
And that's interesting too, because you have like a key figure like Shakespeare, who basically we owe him so much, and it's basically because he sat down and wrote these stories. It's amazing, and it's like another cornerstone of our literary and also of our assessment of the world through literature. But then basically what he did, he used historical characters to project on his dramatic persona, but he has a lot of mythic potential, and I'm sure he took a lot of stuff from old folk tales and older mysteries, and this the Tempest and stuff like that is so filled with psychedelic references, and it's just incredibly interesting. So in Shakespeare we also have a great sense of occulture, in the sense that he was present, he was successful, and very, very talented, and left a large legacy. But what is contained in the material has to do with that also. It wasn't just that he was a great guy who wrote some great plays. It was also what was in the plays and how he formulated them. There are many things, many small rivulets that need to merge into a real mythic river that will be so powerful that we can still be talking about it today. And that's remarkable, and that's magical, and it's really the very essence of culture.
Yeah, definitely. So you told us about your book Source Magic, but knowing you've probably also got a bunch of other stuff coming out. So,
Absolutely. I just actually published my first novel in Swedish. That's probably not so interesting for your listeners, but it's been great for me to actually write something long and a novel in Swedish. So that I'm very happy about that. But then, of course, there's going to be over the summer Fenris Wolf 11 and also Fenris Wolf 12. They have been a little bit slow in coming, but they will both be out this summer. And then I don't know, it never ends. It's just new book projects all the time.
If people want to get hold of Fenris Wolf, because I remember I used to see it. I can't remember which store in London it was that used to stock it the most.
Well, usually Atlantis and Treadwell's and Watkins too. I usually tell people to come to the site, my publishing site, trapart.net, rapart.net. There are, all the books are there, but they are also all available on Amazon and all of these biggies, Book Depository and Amazon. So if people want to find them, you just, go there and look for the Fenris Wolf, and they will find them.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for more of your time. I always thoroughly enjoy it. So it's
likewise. And let's talk again soon. There's always things happening, and there are always things to talk about.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. And we are back. That was one of my favorite episodes, I think. It was one of those things where we had a whole list. We should, we'll be upfront with the listeners. We have a list normally of topics that we like to cover, and we like to go into the specifics sometimes within a book. But actually, the broad topic was so interesting that we didn't even get a chance to really go into those topics, which is a good thing, because it gives us an excuse to come back to the subject and dive a little bit deeper as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I sincerely hope we didn't sell short the publication. I mean, it's full of far more themes than we could really cram into one episode. So so you can always benefit from reading the book yourself, and or actually, if you have the privilege, also the good fortune of ever hearing Mr. Abrahamsson talk in public, then you might be promoted to do that as well. So that's even better.
Yeah, in fact, actually, if you want to witness the experience of seeing Mr. Abrahamson talk, we did actually film one of his talks in Brighton. He alluded to it in the interview, in fact. back in 2012. Miles ago, God, seems like such a long time ago now. But yeah, we filmed that and put it up on the Sitting Now YouTube channel. It's a shameless self-promotion. Come on, guys, we're only 40-something subscribers away from 1,000 now. God. Anyway, back to the interview. So yeah, what were your takeaways from the interview today?
Well, I mean, like I said, it's what it's not just what we said; it's what we could have said, and we didn't mention Kenneth Anger, who's like, when you think about the occult themes and culture and the effects and on film and so on, that's something we could have really could have explored. But I mean that in a good way, in a sort of, I come away not entirely satisfied, but that's actually a good thing. That's a good thing in this case.
We got swept away in a different direction, but in a good way. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's when our work works, if that happens.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, we shall be back next week, and we will be because we've already booked the guest, as long as the guest turns up. But yes, we will be back. You can link up with us on social media at Sitting Now, everywhere, including YouTube, where we only need 40 more of you. Come on. We've got thousands of listeners. 40 of you can subscribe to us on YouTube. I'm begging here, Mark. I'm begging.
Oh, okay. He's on his knees.
Yeah, literally.
He's on his knees in the dust. He's in the dust on his knees.
It doesn't cost you anything. Just hit the subscribe button. Anyway, but it's become a tokenistic thing to me now. There's no real reason. I just want 1,000 subscribers. It's my OCD is driving me insane. But maybe it's my fault for not putting these bloody videos I've been working on out yet, but they will be coming soon. Anyway, next week we are returning, hopefully, with Martin Cannon, the author of The Child Stealers, and we're going to be doing a book about phantom social workers, which might sound a bit weird, but actually the story behind it is actually really fascinating. So yes, join us next week and we shall see you then. Bye-bye.
Smerdon.